Whether you're a tourist or an LA local, if you're looking for a more unique experience in Hollywood, then this one's for you.
Hi, I'm Phoebe.
And I'm Adam.
We're the couple behind In the Great Wide, and we recently went on the Terrors of Tinseltown haunted walking tour in Hollywood, hosted by US Ghost Adventures. And in this video, we'll tell you about the locations we visited, some of the spooky stories we heard, and whether or not we think it was worth the ticket price in the end.
So this tour starts on Hollywood Boulevard, right off of Hollywood and Highland, the most popular tourist area in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I tell people you can think of it kind of like the Times Square of LA. There's a lot of shopping and restaurants and street performers and that kind of stuff.
However, there's also a fair amount of history there, which is what this tour focuses on.
So we met our tour guide Brian on the sidewalk outside the El Capitan Theater, aka El Cap, by the Hollywood locals.
There was supposed to be someone else coming to join us for the tour, but right as we met Brian, they called and rescheduled the last minute, so we inadvertently got a private tour.
Yeah, that worked out really well for us, honestly. But it started with Brian giving us a quick, basic history of the El Cap, which was built in the 1920s for live theater, but converted into a movie theater in the early 1940s.
It's now owned by Disney, so you can still go see a movie there if you want.
And Brian told us a spooky story about a projectionist there who once filed a complaint with a manager who didn't actually exist, and how he later died a seemingly violent death inside the theater that couldn't be explained.
Then, when the theater changed owners and underwent renovations in the late 80s, a few members of the construction crew went missing, only to be found several days later inside the theater with no recollection of what happened to them.
Days later. They were missing for days. That's insane.
Yeah.
But we've never been inside the theater, but after visiting on this tour, it's definitely on our list now to go see a movie there.
Brian even included a story of his own personal paranormal experience inside the theater, which we really appreciated. Gave us a little more personal flair. It was nice.
Yeah, and he actually pulled out an EMF detector and explained that the more it lit up, the more spirit activity there is in the area. We had never used one before, but it was lit all the way up, so that was crazy.
They're used all the time by ghost hunters, and you can pay to rent one for the tour when you buy your tickets.
So after the El Cap, we moved on down the street to the Chinese Theater. We were lucky that there weren't any events happening that day, so their courtyard was actually open, and we got to go inside and see all of the hand and footprints in the cement.
Now, there's no guarantees that your tour will get to go into the courtyard, and if there's a big event like a red carpet premiere, you may not even be able to walk on the sidewalk outside of the theater.
Yeah, the Chinese Theater hosts a lot of events.
This also feels like a good time to mention that you don't actually go inside any of the places you're visiting on this tour.
Yeah, you'll be standing on the sidewalk just outside of it or across the street.
But we got lucky on the day we went because the Chinese Theater courtyard was open, so Brian led us to gather around Marilyn Monroe Square, which foreshadowed our next location.
But at the Chinese Theater, Brian told us about bars inside that are all boarded up now, that no one has access to anymore, but noises are still heard coming from them.
And he told us a story about an actor who was mugged and killed on his way walking home from the theater one night, who seems to still be hanging around the courtyard.
Yeah, the EMF meter didn't really register anything here, but it was cool to take a few minutes to look at all the handprints in the cement.
After that, we continued down Hollywood Boulevard and stopped across the street from the Roosevelt Hotel.
Brian told us a story about a little girl who roams the halls of the hotel looking for her mom, and it turned into something that sounds like it is straight out of a horror movie.
But on the lighter side of our stories for the evening, he also told us about a specific suite in the hotel that Marilyn Monroe lived in for 3 years. And in this suite, she had a very particular mirror that she liked with a simple mahogany frame.
That mirror was left in the suite after Marilyn left the hotel, but guests started seeing her in the mirror after she died.
Some people were excited, some were terrified, which led to the hotel taking the mirror out of the suite and hanging it in a hallway inside the hotel instead.
Yeah, and Brian told us that anyone can walk into the hotel to find the mirror, but it's not marked, so you just have to know what you're looking for, and we made a little mental note for later.
Moving away from Hollywood Boulevard up Orange Drive, we could see the famous Magic Castle lighting up for the evening.
Yeah, we walked at a casual pace on this tour, but this portion was slightly uphill, so just be aware of that if you have mobility challenges.
Standing at the base of the hill with an excellent view of the castle, Brian told us about how the castle was originally built as a residence for a wealthy man wanting a French chateau-style home in what at that time was fields and orchards.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine this area of LA as orchards, but, to be fair, a lot has changed in the last 100 years.
So for those of you who don't know, the Magic Castle is now a members-only club and performance space for world-class magicians.
The spooky story that Brian had for us here was about a magician who was set to perform one night, but he seemingly went mad in his dressing room and trashed it.
Yeah, he didn't perform that night or pretty much any time after, so something must have happened to him in that room.
And Brian also said that other magicians don't like using the room now either, because they get a bad feeling inside, so there's that.
I actually happen to know about a fire that happened at the Magic Castle on Halloween in 2011, which people attribute to Harry Houdini because he famously told his wife that he would contact her on Halloween if the afterlife was real. He was a big skeptic.
Yeah, but no one was hurt in the fire, and the castle ended up not sustaining too much damage, but no one knows how the fire started.
We then circled onto a small, quiet street and stood across from the Hollywood VIP Hotel.
Brian told us that he's had some self-identified mediums on his tour before who felt really uneasy near this building. We didn't necessarily feel uncomfortable, so we went with it. It had a weird vibe, but we weren't, uncomfortable.
It definitely, you could feel, some weird oppressive energy. It was weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And without giving away too much, let's just say that the hotel has constantly changed owners since one of them died inside.
However, Brian said the current owners don't like people to know about the building's morbid history, so that's why we stayed across the street from it.
Yeah, we weren't there for very long. We moved back around the block to the back of the shopping center at Hollywood and Highland, where there's a viewing platform to see the Hollywood sign.
Unfortunately, by this point, it was dark, and contrary to popular belief, the Hollywood sign is not lit up at night, so we couldn't see it.
Which was not a big deal for us because we've seen it a million times as locals, but that would be a huge bummer for a tourist.
Yeah. Make sure you get to the tour early so you can go to that viewing platform and see the sign if you haven't seen it before.
And once again, Brian started with some basic history about it, such as how the sign originally said Hollywood Land instead of just Hollywood.
It was put up in 1923 as an advertisement of sorts to promote real estate in the area, but it was only meant to last for about 18 months.
Yeah, it fell into disrepair after many years of being up on the mountain, but since it had become iconic, it was rebuilt in 1978.
The spooky part of the sign is the story of Peg Entwistle, who was an actress that jumped to her death off of the H of the Hollywood sign in 1932, and might have tried to lure a park ranger into doing the same thing years later.
Yeah, a number of hikers and park rangers have reported seeing her ghost on hiking trails in Griffith Park, so just be aware of that if you're gonna go hiking there.
Our final and favorite stop of the tour was back down at the intersection of Hollywood and Highland, across the street from the Hollywood First National Bank building.
We've walked by this building tons of times and never given it a second thought, but apparently the building has been empty since 2008, despite its prime real estate location on Hollywood Blvd, because of its ominous past.
Brian told us the story of a businessman who worked in the building on one of the top floors who seemingly lost his mind, took a secretary hostage, and had the police charge in the building to try to save her.
Yeah, that story does not end well, and apparently now people sometimes report seeing a man with half a face peering down at them from the windows near the top floor, even though no one is allowed inside the building.
I tell ya, the EMF detector was going crazy, and this was from across the street.
Yeah. The windows on the floor level are all painted black so you can't see inside, and if you look closely at the floors above it, you can see white paint dripping down the windows from years of neglect.
Brian said that the police like to station officers on the roof of the building during the Oscars, which are held next door at the Dolby Theater, because it has a good vantage point for security, but in order to get up to the roof, they have to scale the outside of the building because even they are not allowed inside.
Yeah, that's insane. Can you imagine, watching that happen? I don't know. We usually stay away from this area because it is so touristy, but there is a lot of historical significance around there, so it can be worth a visit if you have the right tour guide like Brian.
You should expect to give your tour guide a tip for a tour like this, preferably in cash, but Brian also gave us a card with his Venmo info on it as another option.
And since this was the end of our tour, we thanked Brian and we parted ways. But then we wandered back down to the Roosevelt Hotel to look for that mirror.
There's a lovely cocktail lounge inside that anyone is welcome to come enjoy, and we found the mirror up a short flight of stairs right next to it.
And like Brian said, the mirror isn't labeled in any way to tell guests that it once belonged to Marilyn Monroe, so you just have to know what you're looking for.
It was a really cool way to end the evening.
Now, full transparency, we were gifted this tour in exchange for this video and a blog article with our honest review about the tour. In the blog article, we talk about the fine print, parking, and a few other details, so if you want to find that, you can go to the first link in the description.
This Terrors of Tinseltown tour runs every night and costs $29 per person.
It would be a fun outing for a group of friends, I think, especially during spooky season. You could go on the tour and then head to one of the many bars or restaurants in the area to talk about all the stories that you heard.
As for tourists, which I think is the majority of their customers, this is one of the more unique tours in Hollywood.
And they say that this tour is family friendly, but we wouldn't really recommend it for kids under 13 unless they're already really into this sort of thing.
The stories can get pretty gruesome, and it would suck for everybody else if the tour guide had to tame it down because of kids being brought along.
And also, this tour is not for people who scoff at the idea of ghosts and the supernatural. This tour is not going to change anyone's mind about that, so if you or someone in your group is one of those people, it's best to steer clear of this tour so that kind of negativity doesn't bring down the experience for everyone else.
With that being said, we would absolutely recommend this tour for tourists and locals alike who are into old Hollywood or who are history buffs, or just fanatics of all things spooky and paranormal.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the Great Wide somewhere.